Well, Mark Mix of the National Right to Work Committee says that if elected, Kamala Harris would attempt to eliminate all right to work laws and enforce unionization in every state. One America's John Hines has more from Washington.
The Biden-Harris-controlled National Labor Relations Board has just overturned a past policy allowing workers to have a secret ballot election on whether or not to retain union representation. The change is likely to make it much easier for union bosses to trap workers in forced dues union ranks, even when workers attempt to get out. And with us is Mark Mix of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation and the National Right to Work Committee. Sir, what's going on?
Well, this is preparation for the possibility of a regime change in Washington, D.C. The National Labor Relations Board now is populated by appointees nominated by Joe Biden, who all have union lawyer backgrounds, union legal backgrounds. And unfortunately for workers in America, the National Labor Relations Board has become a tennis match between the rights of union officials, union bosses, and those of big business. The one piece of the equation that's left out are the rights and the abilities of individual workers to make a choice about whether or not they want to associate with a labor union. So in order to get this right, they've got to change the rules so that when the new regime comes in, perhaps, the ground will be set for giving union officials power even into the next administration. That's what's happening. So,
but in the background here, it comes down to money. Is that right? Because the unions, what the unions want is they want to get the dues from workers. Is that correct? So
that's exactly right.
So what happens, how does this process work now? Because there was this issue with the card check,
right,
which the unions wanted you to not have a secret ballot. Some workers, you thought that workers should have a secret ballot. This is the idea that they can either vote to join or not join a union based on a secret ballot. Unions wanted to just be a postcard. You wanted to be secret ballot. So now we have the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, which is controlled by the Harris-Biden administration, coming back and saying that in some cases this whole process should be invalidated?
Yeah. Back in 2020, the NLRB passed a rule that allowed workers to have a choice and use the secret ballot election for purposes of determining whether or not they wanted to be in a union. And it's not just us that want the secret ballot election. It's Congress that intended it to be secret ballot elections. It's the U.S. Supreme Court that said the best way to determine an employee's views about unionization is to allow them to vote by secret ballot. This is a 1974 Supreme Court case called Linden Lumber. Basically, the National Labor Relations Board under the Harris-Biden administration has stood that on its ear and said, you know what? We shouldn't have secret ballots. We should allow union officials to be able to represent workers by any means possible, and that uses the card check, Jonathan, as you mentioned. The card check is really simple. If I can convince you to sign this 3x5 card, that's a vote for unionization. Doesn't matter how I got the card, doesn't matter what I said about getting the card. That type of intimidation and coercion now represents a vote for unionization, no matter how it was obtained.
What can you tell us about Kamala Harris? Her record with regard to right to work or with regard to unions?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, she's a supporter and has recommitted her support for the so-called PRO Act, the Protecting Right to Organize Act, which is misnamed because the right to organize unions is already protected in federal law. But the first thing it would do is eliminate all right to work laws across the country. There are 26 states that have a very simple law on the books that says you get to choose whether or not you want to financially support this private organization that's been forced on you, whether you voted for it, didn't ask for it.
Meaning a union.
Yeah, that's right. So she is a big defender of that. She said she would sign it. She will encourage Congress to pass it and put it on her desk.
This is the PRO Act you're talking about.
The PRO Act, yeah, which eliminates all right to work laws in the country. So she has reiterated that support, saying there should be no right to work. She says it this way: there should be no right to work anywhere in America. That's kind of interesting framing of that. But she should basically, the federal law has granted the states the ability to pass right to work. She's against that. And so she wants union officials to have forced unionism power over every worker in the private sector in America. In a Supreme Court case that we won back in 2018, she wrote a brief that said she realizes that workers are oftentimes hurt by union compulsion and forced contracts, but we ought to force everyone into the unions anyway. That's her position on forced unionism. It's a wrong position. It's contrary to over 80% of all Americans who believe it's wrong to force workers to pay dues or fees to a union in order to work.
Mark Mix, National Right to Work Committee, thank you for talking to us on One American News.
Thanks. Appreciate the opportunity.